My name is Tina Jordan. I'm the Vice President of Membership at AFCEAN International, and we are very glad that you're here at DCOS this week. We hope you find the content of the sessions very valuable, as well as the networking. And we are really pleased to present a Young AFCEAN panel. This is something we started a couple events ago, wanting to highlight the future of our association. And we have a lot of folks under the age of 40 that are doing amazing things out there, and we wanted to provide an opportunity to have them on panels to share their thoughts and their insights. You'll notice in Signal Magazine we now have an article called Disruptive by Design, and that is an article every month that's written by a young AFCEAN, and is disruptive by design because some of these folks have disruptive ideas that we need to get out there and we need to highlight in Signal Magazine. So you'll also notice we are sporting Disruptive by Design shirts, and you do not have to be under 40 to have one. And if you are interested in having a Disruptive by Design shirt powered by Young AFCEANs, is the tagline underneath, you just need to go to the Young AFCEAN webpage at afcea.org. Go to the Young AFCEAN webpage and you can order them. You do need to be an AFCEAN member to order them, but then you can go right ahead and order. So it's the latest trend, and it goes very well with business suits, as you can see. So with that commercial said, I'd like to introduce the Early STEM Education panel, subtitled Answer to Strong National Defense and Global Competitive Advantage in the Cyber-Dominated World. And we're delighted to have you join us for this lively discussion. And we need to raise the bar, raise the baseline of cyber skills by working with students in their education. And that's what we'll be focusing on today. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator this morning, Ms. Kameke Mitchell. Ms. Mitchell is a Supervising Contracting Officer and Chief of Contract Management and FMS Section at the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. Ms. Mitchell is also our Vice President at AFCEAN International of Executive Operations on the Young AFCEAN Advisory Council. Kameke is going to introduce the panel, but I just want to make a brief comment. This was originally a panel of 3, of which 2 of the folks, because of the weather last night, had their flights canceled at the very last moment. And so Xavier and Andy, that Kameke will introduce, were willing to jump in with very short notice. And on behalf of AFCEAN International, I just want to thank you, gentlemen, for your flexibility and your ability to jump in at the last moment. And Colonel, Captain, we want to thank you for making plans to get in early enough that the weather didn't affect your flight. So thank you for being here. Kameke, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Tina. I do appreciate that. Well, welcome again to our Disruptive by Design panel. It's a pleasure for me to have Dr. Andy Hio, Mr. Xavier Watson, and Captain Justin Smith on our panel. Today we're going to talk about emerging leaders within government, industry, and academia, and they're going to talk about the importance of early STEM education and how we're going to prepare our next generation of leaders to build a strong national defense and keep the U.S. in global power for years to come. Gentlemen, I'm going to ask that you please give a brief summary of your credentials, your involvement in STEM education, and preparing our youth. We're going to start with you, Mr. Andy Hio.
Okay, thank you. All right, so thanks for coming. So I've served in the Air Force for 16 years, active duty and reserve. Converted over to Cyberspace Operations Officer in 2010 when I started off as a communications guy back in 2001. And I've had various staff jobs on active duty and in the reserves. Most notable of my time was spending 4 years doing system vulnerability assessments and penetration tests on space weapon systems. One of the reasons I talk about that is because of the cultural divide that there is in technology fields, right? You would walk into a space operational environment and you would think the space guys, who are what we call the uber nerds, would really understand what cyberspace operations is, which we call the uber geeks, right? And the geeks and the nerds are supposed to speak the same language to each other, but what we find out is that there's a divide very similar to the language barrier that currently resides in like North Korea and South Korea. The dialect has changed and has diversified. So in my time before that, I spent some time teaching at the National Security Space Institute, and there I was teaching cyberspace operations to space operators, trying to help them understand that, yes, there is vulnerabilities in space systems, and you can hurt a space operator by telling them that what we see as a cyberspace guy is that your space system is really just a box in the sky. It's just really high up in the sky, right? So that hurts their feelings a little bit, and we're okay with that, because when we're talking about stuff like cyberspace operations, we need to change the cultural environment, right? We bring people on board, and we have talented kids in middle school and in high school who have skills that are probably, you could hire them today. On day one, they're probably could be better than maybe 40% of your workforce. but we hold them up, right? We hold them up because of clearances. We hold them up because of the time-old tale of you guys don't have enough experience yet, right? I'm a basketball guy. When I saw, one of my favorite team, the Cleveland Cavaliers, drafted LeBron James, they didn't not play him on day one because he didn't have enough experience, all right? The talent level and the ability to grow was given to him, and there's roses to bloom from that. I've spent a little time over at with the CU Boulder Cadets, Air Force ROTC there. There is a burgeoning crowd coming forward that has a lot of knowledge, and we need to adapt to that. And a lot of times in our work environments, we're consistently doing the same thing. And one of the favorite quotes that I hate the most is, let's not change anything because it works. We have to continue to evolve. And so I'm really looking forward to having a discussion with esteemed peers here about what we're doing in the STEM force today. Thanks.
All right, awesome.
Yes.
All right.
Captain Smith.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Captain Justin Smith. Just to give you a quick background on me, I came in the Air Force in 2012. I was overseeing enterprise operations, more so enterprise vulnerability assessments, enterprise patch management for the Air Force network at large. From there, I moved on as a cyber protection team lead. So what we did is we deployed out to remote locations to do threat hunting operations, risk assessments, as well as incident response, primarily on ballistic missile defense assets, as well as Air Force, various Air Force weapon system platforms. From there, I continue to move on. Now I'm here actually stationed at Fort Meade, focused within the Cyber National Mission Force. So what we're responsible for is countering other nations' cyberspace capabilities and threats. So I specifically work on a national support team, and what we do is we kind of do that fusion of taking defensive countermeasures and using that data to drive offensive operations. So that's what I currently do right now. My experience within STEM, I was a very big participant in the Cyber Patriot program. I've done that for many years. So down in San Antonio, I actually piloted a mentorship program, more so focusing on how do we raise the bar of our various cybersecurity SMEs and make them better mentors, so that way we could provide better education to children. Because I will say cybersecurity, when you're trying to teach a 8 to 13-year-old, it can be kind of dry, a little uninteresting. So how do we get our mentors to best be able to educate them in a more fun way, so that way it's appealing to them? And then also, how do we facilitate the right types of mentors, right? Cybersecurity is a very broad field, and it's challenging when you say, hey, if I need a networking individual, for some of these programs it requires a high level of technical aptitude within that specific field. So I was really focused on how do I facilitate a subject matter expert in that specific piece of technology to that program based off of a defined lesson plan. I'll actually speak onto that a little bit later, but that was my focus down in San Antonio, and I'm actually bringing that up here at a local Civil Air Patrol. Thank you.
Thank you, Captain Smith. Mr. Watson?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming to the panel today. My name is Xavier Watson. I'm a solution architect and capture manager with DMI. We're based out of Bethesda. So while we're here today is to talk about STEM. So I want to give everybody an understanding of what STEM has done to me for my life. So I grew up on a farm in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, cropping tobacco from 1984 to 1994. And I loved it because that's all I knew. That's all my family did. That's all everybody in my community did. But there was my guidance counselor, Miss Davis. She came to me and she said, you know what, Xavier? She said, you've been making straight A's all through school. She was like, do you want to go to college when you graduate? Like, what do you want to do when you graduate from high school? And I was like, I just want to work on the farm, because that's really all I knew, because my mind was closed. And she said, well, there's this little school called Clemson University. And Clemson University had a STEM program that if you scored over 1,000 on the SAT your 9th grade year in high school, then they would allow you to come to the school, and they would for college credit. So I took the SAT in 9th grade, and I scored over 1,000, and then I went to Clemson University my 9th grade, 10th grade, and 11th grade year. And I was able to get college credit then. So then when I graduated, I was able to actually get a scholarship to South Carolina State University. And as I mentioned earlier, from there, I went on to Harvard University, MIT, Morgan State, and Virginia Tech as well, all within science, technology, and the engineering field. And here within the Washington, D.C. area, so I'm responsible for a STEM program outside of my work environment that mentors over 1,000 kids in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. It introduces them to STEM just like I was introduced to STEM. And basically, STEM isn't something that you just learn. It's something that opens a closed mind. And, all of you that are sitting here today, at one point in your life, you didn't know what you wanted to be when you were growing up. and there was somebody, some teacher, some guidance counselor, or maybe somebody in your family or a friend or a neighbor that just opened your mind to something different. So that's what I think STEM is doing to youth today. So I'll talk about it a little bit later.
Thank you so much, Mr. Watson. We'll start off with our first question. Children are able to effortlessly maneuver on mobile phones, tablets, and computers before they start school. What ages are kids competing at various cyber games for educational purposes? What is the right age that they should start and why? We'll start with you first, Mr. Watson.
Sure. Great question. So when in 2013 and 2014, when I was at MIT for an executive education program working at Lincoln Labs, they had this program where they had 4- and 5-year-olds coming in to do basically STEM examples. So basically they were coming in, they were making paper airplanes, they were making drones. Well, the adults were making the drones, but they were just figuring out how their wirings work. So that's age 4 and 5. And then also a couple of miles down the road, I was a 2015 Harvard University Emerging Leaders graduate. When I was there that summer, they had a STEM program for 7-year-olds, and they would come in and basically it just introduced 7-year-olds who applied to the program. They had to write essays, and then the professors of Harvard University graded the essays, and then they picked like the top 20 students to come to Harvard University for that summer to STEM. And then fast forward a little bit, my present company that I work for, DMI, just a couple of weeks ago, everybody knows that there was like Bring Your Child to Work Day, which I'm pretty sure some of you may have brought your kids to work. So at DMI, we brought a lot of the people that work there brought their kids into work, and it was great because we did like a whole STEM experience for some of the students, like where they got to use fly drones. They got to use the VR readers and different things like that. And we didn't just show them these capabilities, we actually showed them how they actually worked. And we had our SMEs to actually talk to the kids and explain to them how these things worked, and if this is something that they would like to pursue in their life, what are the different steps to get there. Don't just show them something, show them the steps that they need to give them the tools to be able to get to where they want to be in life. So I pretty much feel like any age, the earlier the better is a good age to get kids introduced into STEM. So there's no like right number. It's just the earlier the possible, I think it's better. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Captain Smith?
I would say, I have a little cousin. She's 2 years old and she's able to check email, right? So, if you think about it, put that into that context, like you said, I don't think there's really necessarily a specific age. I think it's as soon as they start using the technology, they should just be introduced to like gains and concepts that have cybersecurity embedded within that. I know within the Cyber Patriot program, I believe they have like an elementary division where they're introducing kids to like what the concept of malware, what a phishing email is, things of that nature. I think you could do that at a lower level. I would say kind of like what got me into STEM. It's actually funny when I was growing up. The big push was getting everyone familiar with typing on keyboards, word processing. Well, that class was built around a game scenario. The application was a game, and it was actually a pretty fun game. You could do that same concept with a cybersecurity focus, right? How do you stop this bad guy from getting in your network? I think that would actually be very enjoyable for kids, and it will kind of embed in their mind, hey, these are things that I need to be cognizant of if I'm playing around with this app.
Thank you, Captain Smith. Mr. Hia?
I'm glad you mentioned gaming because, you told me you commissioned in 2012, so still young, right? Young AFCEAN. Do you remember Mavis Beacon? No. Mavis Beacon teaches typing, right? Yeah. So, the gaming piece, I think, is, there's a knock on youngsters because they're, playing Fortnite forever. There's, my older child, she does typing, but there's a typing of the dead, right? So it's a zombie game where you actually type in words and then the zombies go away, so on and so forth. Yeah, there's training. I love that. I love hearing that. There's different modalities of teaching someone to do something. One of the things that I kind of explored in my dissertation several years ago is that Israel, right? In the United States, I always talk to students and I say, in the United States, the great part about freedom is that we can grow up and be whatever flower we want to be. We can be in the military, we can be police, we can be in fire, we can be an instructor or a teacher, so on and so forth. There's all great career fields. We try and find what fits for us. But in the country of Israel that has mandatory military service, right? Mm-hmm. They are now having mandatory, for the secondary education kids, they are required to do STEM education. They can no longer choose to go be something else. They have to go enter into a STEM field And then after they finish their educational career, guess where they go? They go serve in the military for 2 to 4 years. And there is where what I call is that they are building their team basically like a good small market baseball team, right? You're building it from the minors. You're not just bringing in these high-priced free agents with a bunch of talent. You're just bringing in this, growing your team slowly and growing your team. So as I see, we have teams that do Cyber Patriot as well in Colorado Springs. We had a middle school national champion in Cyber Patriot. Think about that for a second. You have a middle school of like 200 kids, and they're able to go to a national competition. It can be overwhelming. Retention of these kids in these fields, again, goes back to a little bit of the training and clearance level, right? You train them and tell them there's lucrative careers for you in cyberspace eventually. And then they finish the education, they finish certifications, and then they get up and go try and get into a job. And what do? You don't have experience. You don't have a clearance. They're going to go to industry, or they're going to go do something else, right? So we have to, General Shea talks about breaking China. We have to break China on models and how we do things. The military, government adapting to how they attack the cyberspace domain, right? It is a war-fighting domain. We have to change the modality of how we do things. So I think, seeing this educational piece, starting them young, I'm a victim of my child putting my thumb on the biometric reader and buying a extra outfit for her, in her game that for her avatar, right? It gets an extra outfit, and 99 cents later, here we are. So these kids are learning, they're adapting. We run to cases where younger troops who communicate, right? Social media, phone. Yep. This is the culture, right? And then we tell them, you cannot have outside communications in this SCIF, right? It's like, the question is, why? This is how we communicate primarily. I have great conversations with my 17-year-old on the couch when we're right next to each other, texting back and forth. Don't judge me too much, right? But there's a modality of communication, and it's an ingrained culture, and we need to find a way to foster that.
Thank you, Dr. Hio. For our next question, what are the necessary skills required for a winning team, and how do those skills translate into superior performance into a cyber threat environment in each of your occupational sectors? We'll start with you, Captain Smith.
So I've been on 2 cyber mission force teams. I would say the biggest thing, or the 2 biggest things, are 1, taking responsibility for what you're responsible for. So just owning the problem that you have, and then 2, just being resourceful. A lot of times, at least within this space, because the technology changes so much, it's so diverse, you're not going to just know the answer. There's no one that knows, hey, what's the proper syntax of this specific command that, in order to execute this task. It's the ability to go out, use your resources. Google is your best friend. That's what I tell my folks. Use Google, use the internet, use all those various information resources in order to figure out a specific problem. Going back to the owning the problem piece, I think when it comes to teams and you're doing cyber operations, understanding your strengths and your weaknesses, within this broad field, like I said earlier, it's pretty hard to have a jack of all trades that's really effective at doing everything. I think you're going to have to really, once you get into the actual industry or into this field, you have to really kind of find your niche, and get really good at what you, in a very specific focus area, and then figuring out how do you bring that together, these various strengths, so that way we can, at least for the military, combine and generate effects. So I would say definitely being able to, cyber is a team sport. It's all interconnected. As long as kids understand that, and I kind of tell that to our Cyber Patriot kids as well, is, hey, you guys don't all have to try to figure this out on your own. You have teammates, right? Work together, right? Use each other's resources. You may have notes that this other individual may not, or this person may have figured out this problem before you. Work together, and you guys can all win together, right? It's not an individual sport.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Captain Smith. Dr. Hio?
So I just read a study a couple weeks ago about stereotypes within the cyber field, right? Where for a long time ago, the IT guy was the one that was working in the basement. Sometimes you would shove a tray of food underneath the door. You would hear some chewing and clacking on the keyboard and maybe a little bit of grunting, and stuff would work, right? The IT person is the one that you don't talk to unless something is going wrong. The cyber person now has to be front-facing. They have to be operational. They need to be able to fight for funding, talk in front of a CEO. That's terrifying for this stereotype of the introvert. So one of the things we talk about culturally, at least in our area in Colorado Springs, is What does the cyber extrovert look like, right? How is that person able to do their job? But the study that I was referring to actually found that those in cyber operations, they do know how to do their job, right? They rarely talk back and forth to each other. They still work really well as a team despite the lack of verbal communication because they, we'll use the Rocks line, they know their role, right? They know their role. And so one of the things we also want to explore is that, especially in government and a cyber domain, is that we explore a lot of black and white. We're really good at ones and zeros, right? We understand the binary. There is a lot of soft gray in the cyberspace domain that we have to address, is the cultural piece of what makes that younger person tick, right? Their motivations are different than someone who's long in the tooth, who's been doing, let's say, IT operations for a long time, understands maybe even switching a router or digging cables and so on and so forth. There's a different type of mindset. So looking at the left brain, right brain modalities and how those are affected by someone who's actually doing this type of work is something, that's a good research project for someone to start to explore.
Thank you, Dr. Hio. Mr. Watson?
So I would absolutely say that I think that mathematics is one of the most important technical skills that youth can learn that can help them in the STEM field. Because when I was doing a flight trajectory paths for air traffic control systems, just understanding the syntax of how you actually code something isn't going to get you to whatever the flight trajectory path is. You have to understand the semantics behind it. For example, like when everybody was in kindergarten or first grade, and you learned addition and subtraction, and then as you grew up in ages and you started going through the later school years, you started having the problems got a lot larger. And you had to learn, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Does everybody in here know what that is? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. So that's one of the things that you have to learn, and you just basically take that and you multiply that exponentially, and things like that actually help you to get a better way to understand things, because it's not just the syntax, it's also the algorithms behind the semantics to get there. And then another way that math can help is because of the youth that I mentor in the STEM program, a lot of them are of the age like before pre-teenagers, and whenever they become teenagers, teenagers they like money because they like to buy things, and so in order to buy things, if their parents don't give it to them, they're gonna go out and get a job. And a lot of these youth, have never had a job, and I asked them a simple question. I'm like, if you make $10 an hour, and you work 40 hours a week, and your paycheck is $200, is that right? Is that a lot of money? And they're like, yeah, $200, I can go get some new Jordans or something like that. And I'm like, yeah, but how much are you supposed to be making? And it's basically the simple things like that. Math is gonna help these preteens to get to where they need to be, to be able to understand the things that they need to understand in life.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. For our next question, research states that it takes 10,000 hours to build a subject matter expert. And Moore's law states that computing power doubles every 2 years. How do we groom the next generation to keep up with the natural technology advancement? And we'll start with you, Dr. Hio.
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing, right? These days with government jobs and contracts and things like that, we have a lot of gates in terms of certifications, right? And you've heard that, I'm sure you've heard that as well. It's a certification this, certification that. And you get an email from someone and their SIG block, the email is actually maybe a sentence long, but the actual email itself is like a gigabyte because of all the additional certifications they have after their name. And what we're looking for is real knowledge of a person, right? We have to clear gates for certifications because that's what we say it has to be done, right? There's a requirement or a reg or something like that. But what we're looking for is tangible information. With my company ITS now, we've actually started providing for a practical interview, right? We actually put them in front of a console and say, do this, right? And we're not asking for a higher level advanced certified ethical hacker type level stuff. We're just saying, show me what you can do. Perform command function. Give me a Linux command. Show me something, right? So actual practical experience on the model. I think what we find now these days is that in the cyberspace domain, there is a lot of cash to be had, right? A lot of people are starting to add zeros to their income, and that's great and dandy. But I find talking to the youth today that the dollars, yeah, those are nice, but if you can attach them to a real, tangible mission where they feel like that they're doing something, and they're part of that team that Captain Smith talked about, they're going to play in that game with you. And we can talk about cost models and things like that, but if there's a real tangible mission associated that they can feel something here where they're part of a team and included, right? Because the studies show, right, we'll do a little bit more stereotype discussion with millennials, right? They're entitled and things like that. Make them feel part of the team. Make them feel part of the A team, the varsity team, not the JV team. Don't stick them as, okay, you're now the social media manager. Yeah, we got that, right? Put them part of the A team because their capabilities, their ability to complete the mission is right up there with a lot of the people that you have on your team already. So I think the benefit model, the mission, can overcome those dollars if you're willing to invest into the psychological side of those people.
Thank you, Dr. Hio. Mr. Watson?
Sure. There's two parts to that question. So the first part about 10,000 hours to build a subject matter expert. So I believe everybody has their own limitations and capabilities. So I don't think there's a particular number that defines how many hours it takes to become a subject matter expert in anything. And then how do we groom folks to keep up with natural technology advancement? I think one way that we do that is we provide basically as industry leaders, like for example, my company, DMI, we respond to a lot of government RFIs. And as everybody in here knows, a government RFI is basically the government is seeking information from industry to understand, how they can meet specific requirements, what services and capabilities are out there, and what is industry doing to actually that could actually fit for those services and capabilities. And just one example that I want to give you, one of the things that we did at DMI, we noticed that the Department of State, they had an RFI out because they wanted to better protect individuals at embassies, around the world. So at DMI, we had this capability. It's a situational awareness platform capability that uses a very small wearable device. And basically, it provides a secure encrypted communication to a home base somewhere, and it monitors everything about the user, their biometrics, monitors their heart rate, whether or not they're in a standing position, if they're in a prone position, anything. And basically, because it's not just for the ambassadors, it's also for their family members. And we were able to provide this capability to them, and we got that basically through responding, through an RFI. So I think that companies like my company and your company and basically all of the companies here that you see responding to these government RFIs is one way that we can actually, help out to provide, technology advancements. So.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Captain Smith?
So I think from my perspective, I think, significant investment into a continuing education program. I could just speak on what the military does for us. It's allotted or budgeted. They understand that there's going to be new technology, new courses, new techniques, new vulnerabilities that come out every year. So what we do is, we have commercial training every year that's budgeted out that individuals can go to, whether it's a certification or not. We also send our folks over to these various conferences, so the DEF Cons, the SHMOO Cons, the SciCons, DerbyCon, et cetera, so that way they can, work with industry, understand what's, listen to those talks, so that way they can get back some of the latest and greatest either technology that's being introduced into the industry, some of the latest and greatest techniques, and some of potential security vulnerabilities, and we take that back in and see how can we leverage that. So that's both an operational benefit to the military, but as well as it's an educational benefit to our personnel. And I think that's a purposeful investment in our people from a continuing education perspective. The last piece with that is also we facilitate brown bag talks, right? Where we have somebody working a very specific project, bringing everyone in just to kind of sit in and listen and learn. You have certain individuals that are going to be very proactive or very interested in this field that as soon as they leave home and get off keyboard, they're going home. They're going home and doing the same thing, right? Mm-hmm. So that type of research, you're not going to be able to necessarily drive out of every single individual, but what you can do is take that extra work that individual is doing because they enjoy it already and pass that back to the greater community. And I think that from a military standpoint, I think that's a significant investment that we have made in terms of making sure our personnel are keeping up with the latest and greatest technology.
Thank you, Captain Smith. Our next question. As we live an exponentially connected world where the notion is not if we get hacked, but when we get hacked, are lessons learned from the various real-world examples incorporated into any of your scenarios that you work with your STEM students? We'll start with you, Dr. Hio.
So I think lessons learned are great, and we have databases that put lessons learned out there. We find ourselves in a model when I see competitions we tend to see the kids fall into the same traps that we're planting some type of honeypot or something like that in front of them and watching them walk into it because we do believe that mistake is an experience, right? I think as parents, a lot of us who are parents, we tell our kids that mistake is probably more valuable of an experience sometimes than success. Culturally, I think what we see is there's always a problem. My old boss used to tell me that, at least in the Air Force now, it's now a one mistake Air Force, and then his counterpart would tell him, you're wrong. It's not a one mistake Air Force. It's a zero mistake Air Force. And that kills innovation at any level when you start telling people that they can't make mistakes, especially in this domain where it's highly technical and we need to have very astute minds who have to learn how to do things on the fly and adapt and think. It's not just a checklist anymore. We're asking people to do things where we're asking for basically an error rate of 0, and they have to complete a task that's super complicated and don't mess up, because if you mess up, the world's going to blow up or something like that. We have to allow for mistakes, and I think lessons learned have to be kind of ingrained a little bit more in our culture as well, so that we are watching those things and going, okay, this happened, X happened, Y can happen, Z can happen, and then we can also continue to adapt, evolve, because quite honestly, that's what the adversary does. They just continuously make mistakes over and over, and they're okay with it. It doesn't bother them. They learn from that. So do I think lessons learned from real-world examples are incorporated? We try, right? And we try to teach via mistakes.
Thank you, Dr. Hio. Captain Smith?
So I think trying to apply real-world examples or scenarios into competitions, I think it's becoming more challenging as adversaries become a lot more sophisticated, right? You're not just seeing traditional, this is some kid or some cyber criminal has hacked into the bank and they stole they stole some information or stole some money. You're starting to see a lot more of integrated operations from various nation states, integrating information operations, military deception, with cybersecurity, or cyber exploitation all together in one. And that makes it challenging, right? Because that's almost a campaign, a military operation. So how do we replicate, let's say the Democratic, the DNC hack, right? How do you take that type of scenario, right, or a Sony type of scenario, and put that down, for a child to understand? And I think for us, I think it's more so understanding, hey, these are just various at a high level. They understand the different threats. These are some of the technical things you can do to address and mitigate some of those threats. But I think as we continue to grow, we just need to, maybe make some of those programs a little bit more sophisticated as they progress. I think also keeping them fresh, right? So I would say, at least on the military side, a lot of the trainings and exercises that we go through, they'll create the environment, they'll create the scenario, and that's the scenario for the next 5 years, right? And how much has changed in 5 years. So I think more, being able to ingest some of these real world scenarios in a much quicker way, so that way it's applicable to what we actually deal with in, day out as a society within this domain.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Captain Smith. Mr. Watson?
I think a really good way to try to incorporate STEM into solving when you get hacked is by using black hats. Just to give you one example, so there's a major retail provider whose name I can't mention, but their logo is a big red target. So they got hacked, as everybody in this room probably knows, a few years ago. And after they got hacked, they selected a few companies, my company included, to say, hey, why did this happen and how can this not happen again? And at that particular time, I was actually a program manager supporting DISA on a mobility contract, and I was at one of our offices in Chicago, and I was actually had an opportunity to be involved in the Black Hat. And one of the things that I saw there is that they not only had the perspective of the people working at my company, they had the perspective of people working in industry at multiple companies involved in this Black Hat to throw out different scenarios based upon what happened at this major retail provider, to say, you know what, if this happens again, then you should do this set of actions, or if this happens again, then maybe you should do that set of actions, and those set of actions should spin off on something else. So I think one of the ways that we can kind of incorporate this is to do black hats and to get the external perspectives of a lot of different people, and don't just rely on the people that work within your organization or your particular company or maybe even your government agency. Rely on you know, the minds of everybody, because everybody brings a different perspective to solving, you know, different problems, and hacks are always going to happen, you know, as you know. So it's always good to try to stay ahead of that by allowing you know, the synergy of information to come from multiple organizations external to yours.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. To expand on your competitions, let's discuss how are you guys developing your scenarios and how are they applied to make the competitions both a learning experience for your participants and a value to our nation. We'll start with you, Captain Smith.
So when I'm specifically, I could talk through Cyberpatron or what we did. So like I said, sometimes it can be a little dry when you're trying to teach, you know, networking fundamentals or operating system security foundations. What we try to do is try to mix that up, right? So, you know, I'll teach a very little, you know, hey, these are some lessons, but like give them a virtualized environment that they could operate on. And so that way, while we're doing the lesson, they're getting hands-on experience just following through. Two, I think competition for most people, at least you breeds out the best of everyone. So, you know, I would break them up into individual teams and see how they would work together, right? You know, give them a scenario, give them a problem set that I know they probably may not be able to figure out, but just to see what kind of results. Sometimes you get really innovative thought and solutions by just giving somebody a box and asking them to operate within that space, but giving them the flexibility to move around. Like I said, I think just focusing, having the kids the opportunity, like I said, making it a game. I think that's the bottom line. Letting them get hands-on. Don't PowerPoint them to death. Don't lecture them. Giving them real-world stuff to work on, hands-on keyboard, and then giving them a problem for them to figure out. That's going to keep them both interested, and it's also they're going to come with some pretty innovative thoughts.
Thank you, Captain Smith. Mr. Watson.
Sure. One of the things that I do in my STEM organization outside of work in Washington, D.C. is that we do STEM basically competitions for these youth once a month. And one of the ways that we go about developing the competitions is we have them to get a real-world application from a newspaper. Everybody, all of the students, all of 100 students, they have to bring in a newspaper, and then they have to select one particular news item from that newspaper. And then we say, okay, if you're reading whatever you're reading, what is the problem with what you're reading? Because as everybody knows, the news isn't always positive, so there's always like a lot of issues that you read about in newspapers. So we say, okay, how can you use STEM to solve that problem? And then they talk about it for like 3 hours, and then we notice who's working in groups together. Well, we notice who the friends are in the groups, and then we break that up, and we say, all right, you're working with this person, you're working with that person, and then we say, okay, next week when you come back, I want you to come back and you're working, in the group that we pointed out, and say, how can you use STEM to solve whatever that problem is? So I think that by developing these competitions using real-world examples, it gives them an understanding of how to solve something that's real, not just something that you read out of a book. What is the actual applicational practice that you're using to solve whatever the current situation is, and how can you work with somebody that you don't know? Because as a growing young mind, you need to learn not just things in books. You need to learn how to interact with people, because interactions goes a long way in life. So.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. Dr. Hio?
So I think it's very interesting when we talk. You made a great point about interacting with people. We talk about coding, the technology involved, understanding the black and white, ones and zeros, got it. In Colorado Springs, we do go to very disadvantaged areas where we try to concentrate on doing STEM programs with a lot of minorities that have historically been underfunded, lack of training, and you put them in front of a console, and it's amazing what they can do. Once you start running through processes, and certainly we don't want to PowerPoint them to death, but when you start saying, okay, well, A plus B equals C, and then C equals D, and going on through those logical sequences, they start putting it together. And it's about really, in terms of that, it's really about opportunity, the coding opportunities. Gosh, my 7-year-old just even has her own little STEM programs on her iPad that, she's just making little mechanical maneuvers, and this thing goes this and does this. Maybe you remember the Incredible Machine from like 20 years ago. We used to play that with her. So they're trying to find solutions in many different ways. And I think that's the attack angle we have to start looking at things. there's a little bit of a movement to saying, okay, the trade industries like welding and things like that, you don't need to go to college, but you can make a ton of money, and that gets to be sexy and attractive to a lot of different people. But going to college, and we're starting to see that there's a lot of research that indicates more of that liberal study. Yeah, those classes you used to take, the econ and microeconomics that you had to use to graduate with your degree in biology, that makes a lot of sense, I'm sure, to a lot of you. But doing the other liberal studies is starting to build that holistic mind to where you can start doing different things in this type of technical field, right? Because we're not looking at, as you mentioned, Captain Smith, is an adversary that's static, that just stands there. There's maneuver in cyber, they're adapting. And then we start to build teams that need to be able to adapt and maneuver in the same, it's like almost a dance with each other, right? So finding those opportunities for more liberal studies and engaging with them at the middle school and high school level, and in some cases, like you guys have mentioned, at the elementary school level, has flourished, and it's built teams, 10 years down the road.
Thank you, Dr. Hio. Our next question. STEM education is often lauded for developing critical thinking skills. How does the Blue-Red Team construct develop the offensive and defensive approach to solving complex problems in our future? We'll start with you, Mr. Watson.
I think the blue team, red team construct is a really good way to get kids thinking about how to actually solve problems based upon issues, because the red team being the offensive and the blue team being the defensive, it basically gives you two different perspectives on a particular problem. You have one team that's basically attacking, and then you have another team trying to actually defend. So if you break the kids up into two different areas, then you get to get the kids thinking about, okay, how can we actually break this system, or how can we hack into this system? And then you get the other team saying, okay, how can we actually defend it? And then you switch the kids. You have one team doing the red team once, and then another team doing the blue team once, and then you just switch them to give them that different, basically, train of thoughts on how you actually can defend something and how you can actually attack something, because that's how hackers are thinking right now. They're just not thinking on how to get our information. They're thinking about how you're actually trying to defend it, and that's how they're getting more and more mature, on a daily basis. So the hackers are thinking like that way, and I think that we need to mold young minds to think that way as well.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Watson. Dr. Hio?
So, obviously when you're playing in a blue-red scenario, what team do you want to be on usually, right? You want to be on the winning team, pretty much the red team, right? Because you get to adapt, you get to do whatever you want, you get just to fire away, you have cheat codes for unlimited ammo, and you just start blasting the other team. And the blue team's like, well, if we can be right maybe a couple times and get some lessons learned, and we're feeling pretty good about ourselves, right? We're able to move on. I do develop exercise scenarios in Air Force Space Command, and it is quite a joy to develop scenarios for the red team, but then for the blue team, you're just like this. It turns very goth very fast. It's a very morose environment. You're like, how can we win, right? How can you stave off any type of offensive effort that continues to go on? Obviously, we know that red and blue teams, they're using the same tool sets, right? If you're educated on one, you can educated on the other, and it takes some time to learn the operational piece and being able to translate those skills if you're going to switch teams. But I think being able to sit in that process, to be able to learn. We tend to do in AFCEAN, we try to move everyone onto a red team first, and then we will progress them to a blue team, because we don't want to psychologically damage them just by being on the blue team first and just have a culture of losing, right? We want to have them win a little bit, move on, go forward, and okay, now we're going to see what you can do defending what you've just seen, right? All these attacks that you've seen, have you developed any type of manner of adapting and being able to fix that environment? So I think, it goes back to a little bit of discussion of mistakes, lessons learned, being able to go through and have that experiential type of environment to where you're learning how things are being done.
Thank you. Captain Smith?
I think the use of red team, blue team type of construct and those type of educational environments are key. As someone who's done, I guess, blue team and red team in real life operations, I'll say that the perspective is very similar, right? I would say operationally your mindset may change, but technically it's a lot of the same stuff. I think going back to what you said earlier, having to be able to deal with a living, breathing adversary, right? Another human being, right? The computer, when you have a hacker, that's another human being on the other side of that keyboard, right? So understanding that and how that individual thinks, how to predict what they may or may or not what to do, and understanding that adversary from a blue perspective is critical. And I think, in life, right, you're going to deal with, adversaries, you're going to deal with conflict, you're going to deal with an opposing force. I think that, that blue-red construct kind of, one, makes it much more fun, much more challenging, as well as, like I said, much more interesting. I feel that on the red team side of the house, it's a lot easier to do offense than defense. Defense is significantly harder. I think, like you said, being able to rotate, children through both and see both perspectives is very beneficial. So that way they can just open their mind and really, think about how do I solve a problem in a variety of different ways. Yeah.
Thank you, Captain Smith. How does your organization view your investment in the future generation, or how do you personally view your investment in the future generation? What are you doing to develop the generation personally and your company? We'll start with you, Dr. Hio.
So at least for my on my civilian side, we're putting investments into STEM education financially. Obviously, internships are certainly available for those that apply. We talk about the cyber workforce and how there's supposed to be this, I guess it depends on what study you're looking for, anywhere from 20 to 300 million people gap in jobs because of lack of training, because of lack of personnel who want to enter this field for various reasons. There's different career fields in high school that may appeal to a particular student. But what we're seeing is that in our internship level, we're filling at about, we have about 150% over in terms of applications versus filling, because we find the right talent and we're trying to find people who actually want to do this stuff. What's interesting to me, and I could speak to this personally, right, is on the military side, is how we're trying to adapt the domain, right? So for someone like me who has this is my studies on my life, and I have done my doctoral dissertation on this type of stuff, and can achieve great things on the contractor side, but then when I put on my blue suit and go into the reserve side, they're like, you're just a major, right? We got decision makers up here who can take care of this stuff. And this is me breaking China a little bit in what I'm going to say, but a lot of those 06 and GO level people, at least on the Air Force side, are plane drivers, right? And this is a highly technical environment. And I know a lot of these people who are great managers of money and personnel, but this is a highly technical domain that requires a lot of understanding of what capabilities are able to be done, how long it takes to complete a tasking order, so on and so forth. And so the question begets itself. It's like, is this the right time to bring in someone who's great at managing people and money, but doesn't have a true understanding of the technical field? It's why I like to see we just finally have a cyber person coming into 24th Air Force to go be commander, right? Finally. I mean, I was like cheering. I was like, one of us. So I was very excited to see that. So at least personally, what I'm seeing, there is a divergent attitude, at least on the contractor government side versus the military side. It's a great integration. I really believe in the reserve model because you can get a lot of experience in industry, and then for 2 weeks you can go break stuff, right? You can go do the operational mission. It's just like the flying world. You may fly a 747 as a United pilot, but only when you go on reserve duty can you go get in that F-16 and go fire and destroy things, right? It's like your little playground and sandbox. So, I think the overall, we're starting to view our investment in this type of programs to, we're looking down the road. We're not trying to fill immediate requirements. Yeah, kind of, we're doing that a little bit, but we're looking towards the end game here, which is 10, 15 years down the road, and trying to find the right people and breed a culture of cyberspace understanding.
Thank you, Dr. Hio. Mr. Watson.
I agree with what Andy was saying. So it's great to see organizations like, for example, like my organization as well, investing in STEM. So they hire interns every summer at our headquarters location in Bethesda, Maryland, as well as we have a STEM outreach program at our Europe office in Barcelona, where we work directly with the university professors to introduce STEM to university students and high school students there at our Europe office as well. And me, just as an example, STEM is actually how I got my first start. It opened my mind to something greater than working on a farm cropping tobacco, which I still love, but it just gave me a different perspective on life. What else is out there other than doing that. And I just think that it's great to see organizations investing in that. And then also I supported DISA as a program manager for 10 years. And DISA, recently, they have a STEM outreach day as well there. And I would see the students come in each year. And I just thought that was good, that I was supporting an organization that invests in the minds, of the future. So it was just, pretty good to see that. And yeah, so that's all.
Thank you. Captain Smith.
So my background, I've been a direct beneficiary of the Air Force investing into STEM. So I got the opportunity to do a lot of internships in college, Cisco, NSA, Johns Hopkins APL, as well as the Air Force Research Laboratory also hosts a summer program for cyber warfare education. It's called the Advanced Course in Engineering. It's like a month. It's a summer-long program, so I took part of that back in 2010. So I will say, and even going from there, I would say, like in this case, 24th Air Force AFCEAN, they work very much with Cyber Texas, and what they do is, as part of the Cyber Patriot program, they sponsor the Mayor's Cup down in San Antonio. So the two-star, the AFCEAN commander will actually come down to that, to the Mayor's Cup as well, as well as with the San Antonio mayor, and award the winning teams for that competition. So I think AFCEAN has heavily been invested from a military standpoint with promoting STEM, as well as, like I said, that Cyber Patriot program is ran by AFA. So it's also Air Force level investment.
Thank you. Thank you all for taking the time out of your busy schedule to provide valuable insights at our annual Defense Cyber Operations Symposium. In 1 minute or less, what advice would you give on how to best support early STEM education for our national security? And we'll start with you, Captain Smith.
I would just say focusing on the best ways, this is not even a technical thing, best ways to communicate to a child. Understanding, what interests them, understanding what their needs are, and then, figuring out how to best establish those communication paths. If we can do that and really take the time to invest our personal time away from work to just spend an hour or two a week, I think that pays huge dividends. And then once that communication path is established, any knowledge that you can give, you can be provided easily. But it's just getting that communication path, getting them to listen and believe what you're saying. I think that's critical.
Thank you. Mr. Watson, your thoughts?
I agree with what Captain Smith was saying, but definitely just you have to listen to youth, because a lot of times, as a volunteer, I see a lot of people trying to just basically talk about what they know or what their organization does, but you have to actually connect with these youth in order to get them to trust you, because that's the only way that they're going to actually get something out of whatever you're trying to teach them. So basically, all I say is you just have to listen, and if you listen to the youth, you're going to find a way. There's going to be something that they're going to say or do that's going to allow you to connect, with them. It could be any little thing that they say. So basically, just listen. And then also just push math. I'm a big advocate of that. Math is the platform for everything. So just push math and listen, and just try to find ways to connect. And then also, as Captain Smith was saying, volunteer. STEM is available in a lot of different areas in your community, at your jobs, everything. It's easy to find a way to volunteer in STEM. So just give back to your community in STEM.
Thank you. Dr. Hio?
You make a really great point. I think we do give a little bit of lip service to saying that we need to support our youth, and we have to actually make that financial investment. I mean, obviously you've seen strikes across the country for high school teachers, and they do need that support. And it's not just the STEM; it's in all educational levels, from elementary school all the way to college. One of the other things that Captain Smith mentioned earlier is that as he mentioned, this is a team sport. being in Baltimore, I'm really against the whole all-star model is what I call it. I've always dubbed this in the cyberspace domain is the all-star model, right? It's the team that just continuously gets super high-priced free agents. I'm talking about the Yankees, right? Because they just, oh my gosh. So they just continuously get super high-priced free agents. They bring them in and they just try and dominate and do everything, right? It is a team sport as it pertains to cyberspace operations, and you really do need to treat all members on your team, give them value, and that starts at the beginning, at the middle school, elementary school, middle school, and high school level. Assign value to their worth because they know what they're doing. They just need the opportunities to move forward and do so.
Thank you. We have 2 minutes for questions. If anyone has a question, please go to the mic and we'll take 2 questions.
Yeah.
I don't think your mic's on. He's turning it on.
That's on. Okay, now. Okay. We all recognize this to be a national problem. And what I would characterize the discussion thus far this morning is kind of the bottom-up approach to things, or at best, maybe the thousand flowers blooming kind of approach to things. Now, if you were king for a day, what policy changes nationally would you advise the Secretary of Education? Or, because the current administration seems to be going more in a decentralized approach to education, what would you advise the state secretaries of education in terms of policy towards STEM?
So, great question. So I could easily answer that one. So I grew up in the Head Start program. I would absolutely, first of all, say keep the Head Start program because I know they're trying to do away with that. But I would absolutely say try to incorporate STEM in the Head Start program because that was one of the things that wasn't incorporated. Well, when I was in school, there really wasn't much talk about STEM back in like the 70s and 80s. But I would definitely say, 1, keep the Head Start program, and 2, put STEM in the Head Start program because that allows a lot of underprivileged youth to get a chance to get that education before going into kindergarten because a lot of times, you know, parents in certain areas aren't able to put their kids in like daycare and things like that, and they just have family members watching them. But if you have a Head Start program that a kid can go to that gives them that structure, gives them that early education, incorporates STEM into that, I would absolutely think that could definitely make a difference in a lot of different community areas.
Thank you.
Hi. Quick question. I noticed none of you discussed apprenticeship. Cybersecurity apprenticeships are beginning. We have one. Can you give us your thoughts, each one of your thoughts on apprenticeships? Cybersecurity apprenticeships specifically.
So I'll kind of speak on that. So when I was in high school, I did a Cisco program, networking program for 2 years. And part of that program was essentially exactly what you discussed. We worked for the IT department, and we were essentially free labor for them to work. But it was, we got graded on it. It was part of the program, but it was, kind of like an unofficial apprenticeship. I think it was very beneficial for me because, I kind of got that day in, day out experience as to what, doing this job looks like, and I kind of got a feel for, what I didn't like and what I did like. And it really helped shape, when I decided to go to college, what I really wanted to do. And I think those are key. And like I said, it gives you that first introduction into that workforce role. And I'm a huge fan of it.
So I think cybersecurity apprenticeships are great. When I was coming through high school and college, there really wasn't much talk about cybersecurity. It wasn't really a term like that. But looking back at the university, South Carolina State University, they do have cybersecurity apprenticeships now. The NSA actually uses our university to basically breed cryptologists. So they come there every year and they put on like a whole overview of basically what they do there. And then they pick about 5 or 6 students and bring them to the NSA location and give them basically an apprenticeship, for the summer. So I think it's really great that they're doing that now. So.
Thank you again. Thank you for taking the time out for supporting Young FC and our Disrupted by Design panel. We really do appreciate it. We hope that we continue these conversations about encouraging our youth to study STEM and bringing them into more apprenticeships and things of that nature. I'll call Tina Jordan back up. Thank you, gentlemen.
Let's give this panel a round of applause. That's amazing. You know, we had the weather issue last night. Was a little concerned about how this panel was going to take off, and I love it when things work out just as they should. I cannot imagine better panelists than we have as these three. And you identify people that you think would be great on the panel, and you never know how they're going to interact with each other. And I think the interaction and just the dynamics of the three were terrific. And Kameke, thank you for hosting the panel and putting it together. So thank you very much for that. Just a couple points I want to mention. AFCEA, because we're a nonprofit, our chapters with the proceeds from their events have been funding STEM scholarships for a number of years for folks going off to universities. And we are finding that that's great, and it makes a big difference in the life of that person. But to your point, Mr. Watson, we're finding that in the earlier ages, we can get that money to the students. It has a much bigger impact. And so the chapters are starting to not just provide scholarships, but really fund elementary school science classes. We've had one chapter actually build a science lab in a school. We've had others, our teacher grants program that we have at AFCEA. We're getting money at the lower ages and finding that really is the way to impact the future of STEM. So we just want to thank you. I think Nate Schwab, we want to thank you for helping to put this panel together, and I think you have a thank you gift for the panelists. To all of you, we're going to take a break now for lunch, continue the networking on the floor. We have another session in here this afternoon highlighting women in AFCEA. I hope you'll come back for that, and let's give one final round of applause to our panelists.